Ladies and gentlemen, I had a few things I wanted to say to you about the program today. The first item on our program is an address from the Premier. The Premier is under a little bit of time pressure, so I'm going to get off so that he can get on, and I'll come back and we'll talk about the rest of the program. So let's go straight to that then. May I ask you to welcome the Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable Dominic Perrottet. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and can also thank Michael McDaniel as well for that wonderful welcome to country and the reflection that you provided just then for all of us here today. Well, good morning, everyone, and can I thank the Committee for Sydney for putting on this event. These are the types of events that I think set a strong vision for our state, and it's important that we continue to challenge the status quo and think of new ways of doing things to ensure that our city doesn't stall and continues to move forward. But what I want to talk about today is transformation and why the past decade for Sydney has been a period of such enormous productive transformation. Seeing transformation on a city level is deeply fascinating. Around the time that I entered Parliament back in 2011, a new feature on news sites was emerging, known as the slider tool. You're probably all familiar with it. You have a picture with a line down the middle, and the reader can slide left or right to see the really stark before and after comparison. One of the earliest ones at the time showed the impact of the Fukushima earthquake in Japan. Now, it's such a simple tool, but so effective in illustrating transformation, which has made them incredibly popular. I think the reason for that is that it's incredibly hard for us to appreciate how much a city actually changes from street level. When you have a bird's eye view, you can bring all the change into a single moment, and it is so much more impressive. Now, this has important implications for political decision-making and city-shaping planning. In a 4-year election cycle, it is unlikely that big city-shaping projects will be finished in a single term of government. Planning, consultation, and construction all take time, and communities experience disruption along the way. Now, a cynical government could be tempted to put the pursuit of short-term power ahead of the needs of generations to come. Why expend the political capital and the billions of dollars if there's no payoff at the next poll? Now, you can see what this looks like in the decade before we came to office, with so many vital projects being put into the never-never. Projects like WestConnex or the Northwest Metro, projects that everyone knew had to happen. But each time an election rolled around, it was easier to push them further down the road. Now, when that happens, 4 years fly by, then another 4, and then before you know it, a great city like Sydney grinds to a halt. Now, it might take people a while to notice, but by the time they do, you're a decade behind. Unless your government is willing to take the pain and planning and building for beyond the next election, Sydney stalls and people go backwards. Now, we learnt that lesson from opposition. We saw the suffering stagnation causes. And when we came to office, we started building. Not for the short term, but for the long haul. So if you had one of those image sliders to show Sydney over the last decade, it would show transformation on a scale unlike anything in the last 100 years. Not a single metro track existed prior to 2011. But that year, we announced Metro Northwest. Construction began in 2014. It opened in 2019, an 8-year process. And 66 kilometres of metro track has now been laid, spanning Tallawong in the northwest through to the city, soon to the southwest, with another 47 kilometres on the way. 2011 was also the year we announced WestConnex, Australia's biggest road project. Construction began in 2015, and it was only a few weeks ago the link between the two major tunnels opened, almost 12 years in the making. Now, a cynic might say no government in their right mind would attempt these kind of projects, spanning 3 electoral cycles, posing untold logistical challenges. But once these projects are built, overnight the mindset immediately changes to how did we ever live without them. You only get these projects built if your focus is not on the next election, but on the next generation. If your focus is not on the short-term pain, but the long-term gain. For me, the City Light Rail is one of the most powerful examples of how the benefits can be so hard to see in the midst of construction, but so clear once it's finished. Digging up the middle of the oldest city was a very difficult task. But we did it because the old George Street cut our city in half like a blunt axe. Now, the light rail hasn't just given people a reliable public transport option to hop on and hop off all the way down to Randwick. It has stitched together the two halves of our CBD in a new way. But importantly, it's injected life and civic pride into the heart of our city. I remember growing up just how dirty, daunting and uninviting George Street was. Now the shops and the restaurants and the cafes along that route are flourishing. But it's not just roads and transport. There's placemaking and world-class venues, the Central Station Walk, the ICC in Darling Harbour, Barangaroo and Parramatta Square, Sydney Modern, Hyde Park Barracks, Western Sydney Stadium, Sydney Football Stadium, Walsh Bay. There's 213 schools spanning new schools, redevelopments and 155 upgrades. There's 180 hospitals and health facility transformations, including Blacktown and Mount Druitt, Mona Vale, St George and Westmead. And there are other before and after comparisons that make life 10 years ago seem like 100 years ago. Now, do you remember what government services looked like back in 2010? You had to take a day off work because the opening hours were just so inconvenient. If you wanted a birth certificate, you had to hunt down the births, deaths and marriage office, wherever that was. I think there were probably 2 of them. To get a driver's license, you had to go to the RTA and take a day off work as well and bring a novel with you and go and walk in those doors where that machine was that you pressed the button and the ticket came out, and then you'd sit there and wait for about an hour and then walk up to the bulletproof glass and be grunted at from behind that glass and told you had the wrong ticket and you had to go back to the machine and do it all again. That was life under Labor in the RTA. Let's not forget that. Service New South Wales has transformed service delivery in this state. The digital driver's license, about how hard change is, the digital driver's license, which I announced as Finance Minister, I think before the 2015 election. And the place went into meltdown over that, saying, well, how can you have a digital driver's license? What happens if your phone goes dead? Well, what happens if you lose your wallet? Like, these are the types of questions that you get asked when you're seeking change. And now when you go into Service New South Wales, extended hours met by a concierge and all your services, all your government services, all in one place. Even the experience of buying a train ticket has been transformed. Back then, you lined up at the ticket window or the ticket machine, you got your cash out, you put it in, you pressed the buttons and you hoped the train didn't come before the ticket spat out. Now, you just turn up, you take out your phone or your credit card or your Opal card and you just tap on. Now, we might take that for granted, but when people visit Sydney from interstate, they rave about how easy that process is. It's another transformation where the before and after is almost unrecognisable after 10 years. All of this transformation happened because we spent a decade working on a long-term plan. We didn't let the electoral cycle or politics get in the way. At the last election, the opposition parked itself out the front of an old football stadium with their arms crossed every day, looking cranky and promising to stop it from being built. Now, every weekend, they avoid the cameras as they're sitting in the corporate boxes, sipping champagne and enjoying caviar. Opposition is populist and easy, but it builds nothing. And as we approach another election, the people of our state need to know not what the next 12 months or the next 2 years look like for our city, but what the next decade looks like. My vision and my government's vision is for the next decade to be as transformative as the past decade has been. And the people of Sydney can have confidence that it will be. Because even though we've been building and transforming for a decade, we have never stopped planning for the future. So if you want to know what our vision looks like, the first thing to do is to look at what is already underway. This year, the WestConnex mainline tunnel opened, with the Rozelle interchange soon to follow, completing the biggest road project in the nation. The new intercity fleet will take to the tracks. The Ultimo Creative Industries precinct will open. Next year, the Parramatta Light Rail will open, injecting new life into the Parramatta CBD and making it easier to get around, just like the Sydney and Newcastle light rails have. Sydney Gateway will open, transforming access to our airport, linking up with the WestConnex and saving drivers so much time. From Penrith to the airport, no traffic lights. The new Sydney Fish Market will establish a spectacular landmark worthy of a global city. White Bay Power Station will be transformed. And from next year, the Sydney Metro City and Southwest will herald a new era for the Sydney CBD. From 2025, we will have a new powerhouse museum in Parramatta, creating a new culture of gravity in Western Sydney. By 2026, we'll have a new airport in our west, with a new metro to connect it. So if you live in the west, when you get a cheap flight, you won't have to spend more on the taxi fare than the airfare. The new airport will transform our city in so many ways. It will open up opportunities, not just for everyone to have a holiday, but for whole new industries and the jobs they create, for export opportunities for tourists to come and visit. Our pipeline of projects is packed with so many stunning before and afters in the making. The Circular Quay renewal, the National Art School precinct, the Warringah Freeway, the Western Harbour Tunnel, the Ultimo Powerhouse Museum upgrade, Sydney Metro West, 130 more hospitals and health facilities, 106 school projects. I could go on and on and on. But why do we do it? All of this transformation has a purpose, bringing to life a vision for Sydney that I've called livable, workable, and beautiful. We are building a livable city that has infrastructure that makes your life even better, projects that improve quality of life, faster transport, schools and hospitals close to home, and through projects and programs like West Invest, great local amenities like pools and parks and revitalised local high streets. And part of having a livable city is making sure housing is accessible to everyone. But those words have often been uttered by so many politicians for many decades without actually offering real solutions. We are breaking the mould. Our stamp duty reform, once again opposed, is a new solution, giving first home buyers the option to axe the tax and choose a smaller annual fee so they can get into their home faster. Doing things differently is central to making our city more livable. Now, that's my approach to public policy across the board, and that's why events like this and the work of the Committee for Sydney is so important. And speaking of doing things differently, I read in the Sydney Morning Herald yesterday an idea from SGS Economics, where older people rent out spare rooms in their homes to young people who are looking for more affordable housing. This is another great example of economic efficiency and great social outcomes being two sides of the same coin. I think this has merit and it's at least worth a discussion going forward. But we have to make sure, obviously, that older people who want to put empty rooms to better use aren't penalised by the tax office. Now, some provisions already exist in income test for age pensions that allow them for income from board, and some level of tax offsets are also available for seniors who earn additional income. Now, with this in mind, I'd like the federal government to take a look at whether the current tax rules are fit for purpose for this type of arrangement. After all, it would make better use of the housing stock that's there. It would give younger people another affordable housing option, and also work to solve an unspoken issue in society, particularly for older people, and that's loneliness. As we make Sydney a more livable city, we're also building a more workable one as well. One that offers access to great jobs no matter where you live. Parramatta is now a CBD bursting with life and opportunity. Bradfield is a new city centre in our west that will offer high-value jobs to set up our kids for a stronger future. And it all works together to create opportunity for enterprising Sydney-siders and investors from all over the world to create and grow businesses that will power our state's economic future. And finally, we're building a beautiful city that respects and grows with our city's natural beauty. Projects like the Macquarie Street Renewal, Walsh Bay, White Bay, Circular Quay, and the Western Parklands. These are not vanity projects. They simply reflect our commitment as a government to do justice to our beautiful city and open up beauty to the public. And I'll give you a small example. The Macquarie Street Renewal, which we announced some time ago, and work is already underway. That land and property information building, which is opposite the Registrar General's building, opposite St Mary's Cathedral, tacked onto the back of that in the 1970s, that awful annexure. I don't know what they were smoking in the 1970s when it came to architecture. We're knocking it down. We're knocking it down, and that work has started. And that will connect Macquarie Street across to the Domain and open a beautiful square for our people, which we'll be naming Queen Elizabeth II Place. But down the other end is the Mitchell Library. And on top of the Mitchell Library was an old space, concrete space that was only used for staffers of the library for smoko breaks. So we announced prior to the last election, I announced as Treasurer, that we would turn it into a rooftop bar. Now that is open with the most stunning and beautiful views over Sydney. Once again, at the time, Labor opposed it. Now every Thursday afternoon they sneak up there and have their work drinks, which I watch from my office. So the point is, the beauty of our city and its built environment should match its natural beauty. And we need to celebrate that and make sure that it is open and that it is accessible to everyone. Now, it would be easy to think that this transformation that we've seen over the last decade will simply just keep going. But it won't, unless you have a government willing to stay focused on the long term. Without that leadership and experience to overcome the challenges, Sydney will stand still once again, and our people will go backwards. That is a real risk. I've not seen an alternative plan from the opposition to build Sydney's future. In fact, I haven't heard anything at all about building the future, other than promises to cancel projects that we believe are important. What I have seen is a number of alarming fiscal commitments, especially around public sector employee expenses, which makes up 40% of the budget. Now, as a previous Treasurer, I know this too well, because lifting that cap will require deep cuts, because they have not accounted for the billions of dollars that it will cost the budget and ultimately the people of New South Wales. Now, that is a familiar story. Former Labor Minister Frank Sardor actually wrote about this in his memoir, when his government had to cancel projects and put critical other projects on the chopping block to pay for that spiralling expense bill. So there is a real risk that even the projects that we have budgeted for will stall, and the ones in the next wave will never become a reality. That will do untold damage to our city and our people. And it would rob our city of the kind of vision and the ambition it takes to tunnel a new metro system under the oldest CBD in the nation or create a third harbour crossing. The team that I lead has not only dared to dream about these projects, we are getting them done. And we'll continue to be bold and ambitious in envisioning a great future for our city. We will offer the kind of ambition that says, why can't we find an alternative to the Cahill Expressway and end its ugly reign over the most beautiful harbour anywhere in the world? Why can't we transform our CBD nightlife with better placemaking and legal reform to make Sydney a 24-hour city? Why can't we extend the West Invest concept so that every local community in our city has a rich and vibrant atmosphere? If you can build the West Connects, and you can build the metros and the light rails and the bridges and tunnels and build a city around a new airport at Bradfield, then there is no reason why we can't do all these things as well. But only if we stay focused on building for the long term. That's what a Liberals and Nationals government in New South Wales will always do. Because my goal is for our city's next 10 years to be every bit as transformative as the last. Thank you.
Premier, thank you. How are you? Good to see you. Hi, I'm Bevan Shields, the editor of the Sydney Morning Herald. The Herald's a very proud supporter of the Committee for Sydney and today's summit. We're going to have a chat for maybe 15 minutes, I think, before you have to dash off. There's a bit going on for you today, which we'll talk about. As you can see on the screen, I'll ask a few questions, but if you want me to ask some questions for you, then log into slido.com and add the password, and I'll do my best to get them to the Premier. Thank you for your speech.
Thanks, Bevan.
Anyone would think there's an election around the corner, but it would be very cynical to suggest that. But thank you for coming, because we are represented here by Labor today. Unfortunately, the opposition leader couldn't make it, but you have made it, so we absolutely appreciate that, and good on you for doing it. A city is obviously more than just bricks and mortar. It's also about the health and well-being of the people who live in it. Everyone knows this city has a problem with poker machines and the impact on health and well-being of the people who live here. You're doing something about it. You're releasing your plan today, some details in the Herald today, but tell us, what can you tell us about the plan and what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say, Bevan, is you're right. Great cities aren't just based on bricks and mortar, they're based on people. And anyone who doesn't believe we have a problem in this state with poker machines has their head in the sand. You take out casinos, 40% of the world's poker machines are in one place, New South Wales. Now, we'll be political because Labor caused the problem. They turned pubs and clubs into mini casinos on every street corner. We've had people throw their life savings down poker machines, and that has to change. Now, change is difficult, particularly when that's how this has been established over time. But what we've announced today is that there'll be no cash in poker machines by the end of 2028. Now, that transition will be difficult, but I've committed completely with industry that I'll work very closely to get that done. A sign of any great city, a sign of any great society is how it looks after its most vulnerable people. Yes, that may create inconvenience for some, but I think we, not just government, we all have an obligation as people to look after those who are in very difficult situations. One aspect I'll raise in relation to the reform today is that we will give grants to pubs and clubs to diversify, to invest in live music, to invest in entertainment, to invest in food and beverage. So we have a great nightlife. This is not about being a wowser. This is about looking after the vulnerable. This is about stopping money laundering and at the same time ensuring our nightlife in the city and our pubs and clubs thrive with entertainment, with live music, and with the best food anywhere in the world.
You've been consulting the industry for many months now. Are they happy with this or are they unhappy with this?
Well, we'll see what they say today, but I've worked constructively with them. I've heard their concerns. I've taken it on board. I've tailored what we've announced today in a way that addresses all their concerns. Change like this is not easy. And when we've been in government, and I've had the great opportunity to work on a range of reforms, they take time to get it right. And there are things, I'm sure, over this next period of time that I haven't envisaged, that I will need to address and make those changes, but we will. But look, the discussions I've had with industry have been incredibly constructive. And my commitment to them, as late as on Saturday, was that I'll work to make sure no one is left behind, that no jobs are lost, and past performance should be the best indicator of future performance. And as Treasurer, during the pandemic, in those dark days, I worked day and night with that industry, with pubs and clubs, with a whole range of reforms to get every single one of them through those challenging years. And we did, and we'll do it again.
Moving on to a couple of other issues. Central Station. I think there's universal agreement that it's hideous and disgusting and a really underutilised part of our city, and doing something there could transform the city. You guys have released a plan for a 15 to 20 year reimagining of that area. We ran a real interesting story from Bates Smart a couple of weeks ago where they talked about some other options for that whole precinct. And look, I think it sort of raised the question of whether we've really exhausted all our imagination for that area. Do you think, given the importance of that project, it's worth considering a design competition?
I'm certainly open to that. I mean, we released a plan for that area because you're 100% correct, Bevan. That is one of the worst areas of our city. And we've obviously focused down the harbour side, but we need to move towards where Central is. And we need to be bold in our thinking. And what you don't generally get from the public service is imagination. And, you know, take Circular Quay. I'll get back to Central second. Take Circular Quay. I mean, the first designs of what we were going to do at Circular Quay came from the Transport Department. And I remember saying, I shouldn't say this because probably in Cabinet, an Expenditure Review Committee at the time, that exact point. The Transport Department doesn't have imagination of what the best harbour in the city should look like. I want the Transport Department to be focused on trains and ferries and metros. That's what they do. We should be going out and at the point in time and looking at ways where we have the best and brightest minds with the imagination to build that beauty. And I'm open to that with Central Station because that is another area of our great city that we should imagine a much better future for. One
of the many things we'll be talking about today is population pressures, density, the opportunities of that, but also the challenges. This will be, I think, a pretty key theme of the election campaign. People in Western Sydney really feel like they're copping it at the moment. They're the part of Sydney that is copping extreme pressure, and they, I think, understandably go, what about the rest of the city? Do you have the guts to tell the people of the North Shore, for instance, that they actually have to build up? They have to have more housing, more homes, larger population?
Well, it's about making sure as we grow well. And ultimately, the future growth of our city is in the West. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. If we go back to where Sydney was many decades ago, the main population growth was in the eastern suburbs and the North Shore. You need to make sure the city grows with the culture and the community in such a way that fits in with the character of those suburbs. What you need to do is make sure as Western Sydney grows, it grows well. And that's why we set out on a plan years ago to build 3 cities. Look at Parramatta 10 years ago to where it is today. We imagined a better future for Western Sydney. When we said we were going to move the Powerhouse Museum to Western Sydney, it was opposed. Now, ultimately, we kept the Powerhouse in the city, and we're building another one in Western Sydney. But people said, why would you build a museum in Western Sydney? Why would you build a football stadium in Western Sydney, in Parramatta? Well, because that is a city in of itself, and the suburbs and the communities that you build off that grow as well. Same with the second airport at Bradfield, our 3rd city. Unlike the previous government, we're actually building the roads, the metros, prior to the population getting to the point where it's needed. I grew up in the Hills. I don't have many people from the Hills district here. I grew up in the Hills. I was in primary school when Labor were promising and talking about the Northwest Metro. It was promised and promised and promised, never built. We built that metro 30 years after it should have been built. 30 years after. Now we're about to complete the West Connects. Yes, I will be political. Labor opposed the West Connects every step of the way. Now, when we finish Gateway, when we finish the airport connection, we will have people being able to drive all the way from the Blue Mountains to the airport. Now, if you don't have that vision, then you'd have a situation in Western Sydney where there would be congestion everywhere. Parramatta Road is bad enough, let alone the West Connects. I'll make this point about tolls. People oppose tolls. Well, there are alternatives to that. It's not just those who use the motorways to get to work quicker and home faster and ultimately spend more time with their families. The ancillary roads as well flow faster in addition to that. So my view on development is we need to open supply, we need to build more homes, but it's all about making sure that we have the transport infrastructure, the health infrastructure, the schools in place to make sure Western Sydney is the best place to live and to work and raise a family.
All right, we'll go to some Slido questions and we'll try and race through them. Obviously, a few Republicans in the room based on the popularity of this one. Why are you continuing to use English place names for new sites? Queen Elizabeth II Park is awful.
No, it's not. Not at all. Queen Elizabeth II is somebody who's made a real impact on the people of Australia. And on her death, I thought it would be completely fitting to name that plaza Queen Elizabeth II. I think it is something that you should always reflect on and remember those people who have gone before us. This is not, and I don't like that question at all, and I'll call it out, because this is the problem. We're having a debate about the voice at the moment, and the debate goes to division, not unity, not bringing people together. Every Australia Day, we have these debates that take us away from what we should be celebrating and reflecting. I've spent over a month of my time as Premier over the last 12 months in flood-affected communities where people have lost lives, where people have lost homes. I've seen the most destruction in my life that will be with me as my life continues. I'll never ever forget what I've seen and the impact that's had. But the biggest impact has been the selflessness, the spirit of service, the generosity that I've seen in our people. People coming from the northern beaches to the northern rivers, just getting in a car and driving to clean up homes and rebuild. That is something wonderful and beautiful about our people that we should celebrate. And what happens is when you make decisions like having Queen Elizabeth II place, people sit there and criticise and say that's disrespectful to our First Nations people. We have a Prime Minister who talks about the voice, and all of a sudden people throw rocks from the corner in a divisive way rather than actually having a unified country. We will never be a unified country. We will never be a unified country at any point when people do things and actually to bring people together and others criticise and oppose it. Let's focus on what unites us. You know, I put a statue of Sir James Martin in Martin Place. Not because it was colonial, because James Martin, people walk up and down Martin Place every single day, and no one actually appreciates who that place was named after. James Martin was a great Australian who set up the public education system. A young Irish immigrant who came here, lived in Parramatta, wanted to go to school in the city. His father couldn't afford to take him there, so every day he said, I'll walk and I'll get that education. He became Premier, Chief Justice, and somebody who I believe has made a real difference. And if we do not honour people who have come before us and learn from them, then we will never get to the potential as a state where we need to be.
Good on you for your message about unity and the voice. Good on you. We'll have to plough. We'll probably go for a few more minutes, otherwise your office will yell at me and that won't be fun. So we'll just whip through these quickly. Climate change wasn't mentioned during your speech, given it's the greatest threat of our time. What is your government doing to address this? Now, you could probably you'll probably talk for half an hour on this, so we'll have to keep it fairly brief.
Our government has the most ambitious emission reduction targets anywhere in the country. And we have a leading track record on it, a strong focus on renewable energy. Our renewable energy zones are going to ensure that not only do we have cheaper energy in the future, reliable energy, but ultimately, as we transition to a renewable future, that we do so in a way that leads the country. And I'm very proud of the fact, and I particularly acknowledge my Treasurer and Energy Minister, Matt Keane, for the work that he's done in that space. But when it comes to emission reductions, when it comes to a cleaner future for our next generation, I'm very proud of our government's track record in that space.
This is a new one that's come in, but I think it sort of doesn't have the most votes, but I think it is relevant to people in this room. Your point about bureaucrats lacking imagination, if that's the case, then how do you make sure that the vision includes creativity outside the constraints of the bureaucratic process? It's a good question.
Because that's a great question, but that's the role of politicians and elected officials. That's why you run Parliament. The role of the public service and the bureaucracy is to implement the decisions of the executive. And it is the role of the executive to challenge the status quo, to not think about, to look differently at the way we make decisions and what the future looks like. Ministers are not barristers for their departments. Ministers need to challenge the status quo, think about new ways of doing things, engage from outside, and that's why I like your ideas in relation to, Bevan, in relation to design competitions. Because we should look at those things from outside, bring in the best ideas, and the role of the public service is to execute and implement those ideas. Now, they should have their own ideas themselves, obviously, and that's a great thing. And I certainly want to encourage and have in the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and we've got great leadership there with Michael Coates-Trotter, to encourage the public service to come up with ideas. But it's not. But the main role of the executive is to of the public service is to implement the plans of the executive, and it is the role of the executive members to have the imagination, the fresh thinking, the new ideas, look at new ways of doing things to build a modern government focused around its people. And that's what we've done through a whole range. I spoke about Service New South Wales there. We are constantly in a war against the invisible, in a way in which if you can't imagine the future, then you'll never actually deliver something that improves people's lives. And as I said in my speech today, there is always criticism and critique when you embark on that vision. But once it is complete, people just say, this is great. It's the way it always was. And that's incredibly important. So yes, you want to drive ideas in the public service, but ultimately it is a role of ministers who are elected to Parliament to have the imagination and vision for a brighter future. You don't vote for the public service, you vote for your elected officials.
Speaking of voting, it's obviously a busy time for you, so we really do appreciate you coming and also for those quite thoughtful answers. So thank you, good luck today, and please thank the Premier.
Thanks very much, Bevan. And Premier, thank you once again for your time today. We appreciate you making time available, not just today, but we appreciate the time that you and your colleagues have made available over the years to the committee to listen to the ideas that we bring to you.